Sure. Welcome again, everybody, to another Lincolnville Selectmen meeting. It is now the 16th of May, and I'd like to open the podium for the Citizens Forum for any non-agenda items. Seeing nobody rushing up to the podium, let's move along to the purpose of this meeting tonight. Thank you all for attending. We now have in hand another iteration of proposed emergency medical service agreement for fiscal year 2020. David, do you care to?
Sure. I know it's unfair to hand you a 40-page packet, and I'm not expecting you to have read it since you just got it. But I'll back up just a little bit to the first of the year. Lincolnville, Camden, Rockport, and Hope, the four towns that contract with Northeast to provide emergency medical services, got a proposal from Northeast to continue for the upcoming fiscal year at the same cost as what we're currently paying. There was some contract language that they wanted to change in terms of some of the training requirements and some other things. There were some minor tweaks that we were looking for in return. Sent it back to Northeast for some modification or for their consideration. Proceeded to budget the same amount of money for the upcoming fiscal year as the current fiscal year. Northeast has been meeting all of their performance requirements, at least in terms of Lincolnville. So we were proceeding on that note or fashion. While all that was going on back and forth, the town of Camden Select Board received a presentation from their fire chief and some other public safety officials regarding the possible provision or study of provision of EMS service under a different model, basically making it either a different vendor or a municipal type department. Obviously that was covered in the press. Northeast actually I think participated or went to that meeting in Camden. And subsequently did not wish to necessarily continue under the same terms that they'd offered earlier in the year. They went back and regrouped. We had a meeting, I don't know, a week or so ago with them, we being the four managers and administrators. Northeast took that information back. They were very forthright with, I'm going to back up somewhere in between those two things, very forthright with the EMS Performance Review Committee, they being Northeast, to say the exploration of another option was impacting their business in terms of employee retention and recruitment. Although they were able to staff up, it did have some implications to them. Of course, anybody going to work for them is thinking, how long are you going to be here if something else is coming down the pipe? And do I really want to leave my job now, come work for you, and so on. So they seem to have, at least in the short term, worked through that staffing issues and concerns. They've now come forth with they've now come forth with a proposed agreement for the upcoming year, they again being Northeast, where they're offering a one-year contract to us at the same cost. But as part of that, they are seeking to meet with the select boards of the four towns, where they set the agenda for the meeting, with the idea that, actually not the idea, but contractually requiring us to put forth a multi-year contract to the voters of the town for consideration. And that to be put forth in November of this year. With terms still to be determined, there was some discussion about having that term, or the compensation part of the term being what we currently contract for, and then increasing based on some inflationary measure between now and the end of the contract. But that hasn't been spelled out in writing as yet. And they also have new termination language within the contract regarding about if somebody wants to leave early or wants to leave, what you have to pay to get out. And at this point, it's unfair to spring a 20-page contract on you and expect you to make some sort of decision about the issue. Couple of things that I think are important in terms of conceptually that we need to that you folks need to discuss and at some point make a decision on. Because the actual physical or the written word language can be modified up until the time, the four towns agree or don't agree to sign it, as well as Northeast agree to, or not agree to sign it. The overarching things are, one, would we be accepting of a one-year contract at the same cost? I presume we are, we budgeted for it. Two, whether or not a multi-year contract is something the board would even consider, whether you would prefer to continue with 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. We have in the past had multi-year contracts with Northeast. This past year we went to a 1-year contract. Northeast was really wanted to have a 1-year contract because we were going to the performance-based model where we said for certain calls you need to be staffed with paramedics and for other calls you can be staffed with other levels of service, and there are substantial penalties if they don't do what required. In the past we had said things like 24 hours a day you have to have one unit available to us, 18 hours a day you need to have a second, 12 hours a day you need to have a third. We dictated what they needed to have for equipment and staff. Mm-hmm. With the performance model, it's been, we're expecting you to provide this when we call. You figure out how to staff it. We're not going to tell you how to staff it. And that's what they've done. So we need to talk about, in my mind, whether, again, multi-year agreement is something we'd likely consider, unless we were to have a non-appropriation clause in that contract. It would likely require a town meeting vote, so that we could bind ourselves, and the community could bind itself to a long-term arrangement. Whether or not the board would be willing to meet with the other select boards prior to September 1st, and Northeast Mobile Health, with Northeast setting an agenda, and whether or not the board wants us to try to re-engage the other 4 communities in a goals and objectives type workshop with or without Northeast Health to discuss what each community is trying to do in terms of the provision of EMS. I will note that the Town of Hope reached out to say, how are you coming on trying to put that together? I was candid with them and said that Hope was willing, when I'd reached out to them before, was willing to meet, Rockport was willing to meet, and Camden was in the holding pattern. And they said that, if Lincolnville wanted to organize it, or if we wanted to organize it and pick a day, they'd do everything to adjust their schedules to come. And if the other communities chose not to, well, hold it without them.
Have you received any communication from the town of Camden with regards to having a conversation?
Not having a conversation, no. I
Okay.
did get an email today that said they had taken this proposed agreement and sent it off to their attorney to review and would share what comments he had when it came back.
Has their board seen?
I doubt it. This arrived Tuesday. We're obviously since we just had a meeting Monday, and we weren't gonna meet for a couple weeks, we put this meeting together. The Camden Select Board meets next Tuesday, I believe. I don't know if this will be on their agenda or not. The Rockport and Hope boards meet on the 28th, which is the next time you meet.
And I, as I mentioned on Monday, had reached out a week ago to the Camden chair, and I still have yet to have any sort of response.
What's the big secret? Anybody know? I mean, I'll call out the elephant in the room. What's the big secret? What's Camden, we're part of a 4-town EMS service.
Well, I think
I understand holding your cards close to you, but
all four select boards and all 4 towns, we certainly have the right and ability to explore what we think is best for our community. And we should do that. And the challenge is and has been what one partner does impacts others. That's very clear based on what the response from Northeast has been. To go from a 1-year contract at the same terms as the current year to maybe a willingness for a 1 year, but they'd prefer to have a longer term contract for their own, their own business model. I guess we all would. I don't know what the big secret is. I don't think there is a big secret. Just want to do their thing, I guess, with or without us.
I mean, I feel confident because we've been able to do this in the past. Northeast has been amenable to fine-tuning language within contracts that they've presented us before, so I'm not at all disturbed that we could either with our legal representation or amongst ourselves be able to fine-tune some of this language that is presented here in this draft. I mean, I feel like, not to speak for this board, but I feel like, yes, meeting as the decision makers in the partnership makes a lot of sense. I'm not really sure the idea behind Northeast setting the agenda, because I would think that they certainly probably have a presentation and discussion points that they would like to address, but I would think we as boards of selectmen would have our own additional agenda items. So figuring out the nuances there, I feel like is just...
I'm reading between the lines
Yeah.
to say,
Can we all get together?
well, that, and I think Northeast would like, they've been coming to the performance review committee meetings, making presentations, which consist of 1 or 2 people from each of the 4 towns. And they're not sure if all the message has been delivered
Right.
to the boards. Again, nobody said this, but I'm reading between the lines with Northeast to think they don't want to turn it into us versus some other service provider versus some, another interview process, so to speak, or somebody making a pitch to do something different. But I've always found them in the past willing to at least consider modifying contracts and having discussions about agendas and whatever else, so.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly can't pull back all the water that has traveled under the bridge, so to speak, at this point, but certainly getting the partners as they exist currently in the same room to identify what our goals and objectives. I mean, I feel like a lot of these things are good conversation points, but until we, such time that we can identify what are our priorities, what are our goals, do we collectively as partners have the same goals? Only then, there's a lot of if-then conversations really that need to be had. And I wish we could have done that before now, but yeah, I mean, I'm certainly amenable to getting us all together.
Certainly would be nice to know if we're all on the same page.
Right.
If we all do have the same goals.
Right.
Would it make sense to kind of respond to Northeast by saying something like, we think having a meeting is a good idea, and why don't you guys bring your agenda? I mean, why don't we have a meeting where Northeast brings their agenda, like whatever it may be, whether what you're reading between the lines is correct or if there's additional or whatever, bring what you want, and then also the select boards.
Have a second part.
It's also a chance for the select boards to check in with each other. I don't know, maybe you do that in two different meetings, but there should be, for the sake of transparency, maybe it's not a bad idea to say, yeah, it would be good to get all four select boards in the room with Northeast and acknowledge that we're all on the same page or not.
I would like to have some sort of idea of how much time Northeast Mobile Health Services feels like they need to address what they need to address.
Yeah,
so that we could have some concept of the scope of the amount of time that we need to meet, and I would make a suggestion of offering out to the partners, creating some time limit for each town to communicate their priorities, so that it doesn't become sort of a free-for-all. I know the concern often is, structure and respect for time and time frames, but limiting the overall length of the meeting and keeping it really focused makes sense. I think, as you said, David, I feel like a learning experience for us all. While 1-year contracts appear attractive at the outset, the amount of time that we need as a municipality and as a board, and even more complicated as partners, to make decisions like this, a year is barely enough time to start that flywheel all over again. So it makes sense having some kind of multi-year agreement. If it's with Northeast Mobile Health, because they're proposing that, great. I'm not identifying preference in any way, shape, or form, but I am going to say that this every single year, every couple of months, trying to reinvent the wheel with something as fundamentally important as who is going to show up when you are in the worst moment of your life isn't something that I think we should be messing around with in this way.
Yeah.
Flags on flagpoles for what? Holiday? Maybe. Ambulance service? No. So, exploring our options with a non-appropriation clause, because it's the only way that we could do it, really, makes sense under whatever contractor we're looking at. But
Okay.
No, I immediately go to section 12, the termination section, subsection D, that termination must be upon mutual consent of all 4 towns. And
Yeah, that's a new section. That might be something that could really only be established, created via an interlocal agreement. There's all these things. I think
Right.
this,
I mean, it's we're
in a
certainly-
nice way, it's kind of, this offer, I think, is to get the boards to have some discussions and to flesh out some of the issues and have a point from which to negotiate and have discussions. Because Northeast, I don't know this, but, they're not really necessarily in tune with how municipal government works. They're in tune with how to provide EMS services, but the nuances of town meetings and whatever else, I don't think is their strong point.
David, in here, and when I'm looking at the current one, in section 3, fee and contract price, it says $54,463, but
Yeah.
then on the other one it says $83,800.
That's because the
That's-
proposed one is the rock. They did
Oh,
once.
We're looking. Okay.
the default.
I see. We're
Yeah,
just
their
looking at
their template is Rockport,
Okay, so
and then they just changed the names and the dollar amounts
see.
and response
Okay.
times.
And
Sorry,
then,
didn't make
and
that
then when
clear.
that was that to go to that termination thing is so. My understanding when I read this and to get some clarity is, if it seemed confusing, but it was saying, it seemed to me to be saying, if a town is unhappy with Northeast's performance for some reason, beyond the fine thing where it's like, this is bad, we want out, it's saying, sure, you can do that,
But you're gonna
but only if all 4 towns agree. And if all 4 towns agree, here's the fine you have to pay. And if you do it without the agreement of the 4 towns, there's another fine that's just more expensive. Is that a correct?
Yeah,
General-
there was an earlier version that was floated around previously, which said if you got out of year 1, you'd have to pay 80%. You get out of year 2.
Oh,
it'd
okay,
be-
so that's different now.
It'd be 60, and it was a sliding scale that went down over time.
Based on all 4 towns
But-
agreeing.
Well, the 4-town provision wasn't in there.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, there was just,
So,
If you look at section 12, subsection B, termination for material breach, that kind of outlays if
let's
there's
look
a
at that now.
complaint against service or a perceived or actual failure of
Right.
service. It's pretty standard HR stuff, it seems,
Yeah,
to,
the-
describe it in writing. They
Right,
have a curative
right.
period.
the thing that the current draft is a year contract that is extendable under mutually agreeable terms. So how that, for lack of a better word, penalty would come into play might be a question unless you wanted to get out at the 6-month mark.
Right.
And that's why, the devil's always in the details. But I think if you can establish the group's overarching goals, that you can then task people to incorporate that in a contract.
okay.
Like customer service, I mean, there's
Right.
a number of aspects within the contract that we could, like, for example, they have, as part of their efforts to provide high customer service, they have surveys that they say that they'll do, and there's a percentage there. Could increase the frequency or percentage there, or we could, I mean, it seems like it's within our power to call out any level of accountability factors towards their performance to ensure that we're getting what we're paying for.
Doesn't seem like we can sign this contract without talking with the other 3 towns.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Right.
certainly wouldn't suggest that somebody made a motion to approve this contract.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I really think it would be important for the board to communicate with the other towns, and with Northeast about would we even be willing to consider a multi-year contract?
Yeah.
And if we're not, we might as well tell everybody right up front, we want 6 month, 1 year, whatever we want. Terms obviously to be negotiated, so that they'd have to be negotiated because we'd have to present that to somebody for approval. And then, Northeast has not only asked, but put in the draft contract, the board shall meet by September 1st jointly with them. Is that something, again, that we're willing to do? I mean, reality is, why wouldn't we? We meet with the snowplow contractor. He comes in and says, yep, we're ready to go
Yeah,
for winter.
right.
And if some other vendor came in and said, I want to meet with the board would be like, sure, put them on the agenda. And we would. It's a little different with the 4 towns' involvement because you've got 4 different personalities, for lack of a better word to say, and 4 different processes. But I think if the board were willing to do that, to just communicate to the other towns in Northeast, we're willing to do that. We don't, I'm just putting words in your mouth, we don't like the fact that you're gonna set the agenda. We'd want it to be mutually, to our satisfaction. Who wants to go to a meeting and they start talking about, roads in Texas? We wanna know a little bit more about what would be on that draft agenda, even if they put it together and we just reviewed it. And then the question is, my question, more than Northeast question, would you still want to meet with the other towns in advance of the Northeast meeting, at the Northeast meeting, after the Northeast meeting, or not at all? To me, it seems it has always seemed beneficial to meet together before Northeast even wanted to meet.
Yeah.
But I would think that it would be beneficial for the 4 towns to meet prior to
Save,
work
to do it more efficiently.
work out some of the issues, but maybe you want to talk to Northeast and see where they stand.
Well,
Your guess, good mine.
it seems like it will be challenging to get everyone in the same room. So in my mind, it makes sense to set a date and try to get it done, Let's herd the cats as few times as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than having 2 different meetings to try to get everybody to 2 separate meetings. And I'm making the assumption, but maybe this is a crazy assumption, that we're going to try to do this before the contract runs out.
Well,
Which gives
our
us-
initial thought of getting together was certainly to have that meeting before the contract ran out. Northeast is now proposing within the contract that we contractually agree to meet between now and September 1st.
So as of July 1st, the contract would kick in, the service would still be provided, but we're also agreeing to meet before September 1st to discuss the multi-year thing
Correct.
and to
Here-
keep the
Here,
dialogue.
Northeast explain to you whatever they wish to explain to you.
Right. And also to get a multi-year contract idea before the voters in November.
In November, which really means if we're gonna be voting, I don't know if the state's gonna have anything on the November ballot or if we just do it in November anyways, but if we were going to have a November ballot, you really need to have everything worked out by Labor Day. Because we'd have to go to the printer with ballots, we have to get programming done, we have to have absentee ballots available 30 days in advance. You know, there's a lot of moving parts here. But, I mean, it's certainly doable.
Yeah.
This isn't, brain surgery.
But we have one more meeting remaining in this month. Scheduled meeting. And then we have town meeting. And then we have one more meeting.
After that, before the end of the fiscal year.
I think it's pretty clear, we really, the four towns have to meet in like the next 2 weeks, right?
It seems like
hammer
it.
this stuff out. We can't just have the four town managers figure it out. It seems.
No, we don't have any, I mean.
No, yeah, they
Well,
can't.
we could figure it out, but we haven't been able to thus far. But the expectations, and maybe the other managers and administrators have gotten their expectations from their board, but the expectations I got were back in February when it said, well, Northeast has offered us, same service at the same price for the coming year and put it in the budget, and we moved on to, talking about the next thing. If somebody has a different service level provision that they'd like, they haven't articulated it, at least as far as the upcoming year, that Camden certainly has talked about, looking at a different thing for some point in the future. But as I've said several times in this room, we've got a couple of different issues. We've got the short term that July 1 is coming right up, and we have the long term of, what are we doing in the future?
Right.
And my immediate concern is the short term. I don't think Northeast is looking to just walk away, but I think they are looking for the towns to at least communicate that they're willing to keep communicating for the next year while we work the language out.
Thoughts?
Well, I think there's a few things that factor in here, and I'm not sure I want to comment on them right now because in fear that I'm right. But I feel that the partners need to get together and air a few things out. And I feel we need to be united or know what each other is up to before we meet with Northeast, because Northeast is, in my opinion, Northeast is treating this like their meeting. That's why they want to set the agenda, unless they want to forward an agenda to us before we meet with the partners, or to all of the towns, which I don't see that happening. But I feel that the partners need to be on the same page, or at least know where everybody's at before we go and sit with Northeast. My concern is that the perception is the smaller players will follow suit with whatever happens, because they're forced into it. I don't want to be in that position.
I'm very
I'm the only one with that opinion.
disheartened about the fact that I've had to read everything that's being considered by our larger players in the newspaper. That does not sit good with me.
Yeah.
It doesn't take very long to send a memo from their manager to our manager to set on the board, on the table in front of us to read. Doesn't take long to send a representative to sit into a chair at a meeting and talk to us. I mean, I've been following it as good as I can through media, but that isn't really where decisions should be made.
They had in defense of some of our partners, they have been willing to send the same people that went to the Camden Budget Committee and the Camden Selectmen, but I believe this group talked about they'd like to have a discussion amongst the policy setters to set some policy first before we start to hear from other vendors or contractors or whoever else.
Well, to be clear, once there were at least a couple of articles out in the media already calling out a multi-town interest in looking at a different paradigm, they then offered to send fire chiefs from other municipalities to, I don't know what, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but presumably to offer an alternative service or an alternative concept while still in negotiations with an existing contract. And I'm a little fuzzy at this point because there's been so many iterations of the contract, but the contract that had been on the table was retracted when that activity started happening. So, yes, they did try to reach out, but in a way that I think is appropriate, absolutely not. I mean, to your point, Kern, and to your point, David, our responsibility is to our constituents, to our taxpayers. And absolutely, quality of service is of utmost importance when it comes to something as important as emergency medical services. But if we can't afford it, what kind of conversation are we having? I mean, that's what it comes down to. That's the conversation that we have every single year when we're planning our budget is, what are the services we desire? How do we afford them? Do we afford them? And finding that compromise, that constant compromise behind what our taxpayers work so hard to afford. And my concern with the conversation that is happening around us is that there is not that being part and parcel of this conversation. And so we have to meet as a group and identify, what do we have goals as a partnership? Are we able to remain in line with what our priorities are for service and our ability to afford them? I mean, it's that simple. All of this other stuff aside is noise in the conversation.
So I think David should send a memo to, again,
Another
one, and especially, I mean, this kind of changes everything, I feel. If they had their reasons for not wanting to meet now, I don't think they have a reason anymore.
I mean, they're all getting this too, so I mean,
Yeah.
they've got it. I mean,
There's no
everyone's sort
excuse
of
now for us
on the
not to
clock.
meet.
Yeah,
Right, with this.
yeah.
So to follow up on Selectman Gerritson's conversation right there, I would think it would be appropriate to communicate with Northeast Mobile Health and towns of Camden, Rockport, and Hope that the board would be willing to at least entertain a multi-year contract, but we'd have to obviously work out the terms, and that we'd certainly like to meet with the other boards for a board level discussion. And if we need to get together with Northeast to meet, we'd get together with Northeast to meet. another meeting. I mean, at least Northeast has said, we've got, what, 4 or 5 months to meet with them. They're probably not quite necessarily ready with what they might meet. You know, if we said we want to meet next week, they might be like, well, we're not ready to do it. Certainly believe that the other communities, if they could find the time in their schedules, could certainly outline where they are for goals and objectives with EMS. How long does it take for 20 people to get together in a room and go? I'd like to do this. At least you'd have an understanding. But I think we ought to get out in front and reach out and let our partners know that we've got this. We're at least willing to have a conversation with anybody that's willing to have a conversation with us. And it's all on the table. Terms to be negotiated or terms to be established, but
I mean, I understand them, the Northeast asking to, us, to contractually commit to, meeting with them. I mean, because I don't know if they've been getting varied responses from, like we've been trying to reach out to other towns and not always getting a response, and maybe they're experiencing the same thing to some degree, and they just want to get it on paper, like we're agreeing here contractually, we're all going to at least meet, which, I mean, I get that. So I think there is some urgency to it, and I'm basically just reiterating what you're saying. But we should definitely get, the towns should definitely meet and find out if we're all on the same page and find out if there is a partnership. Right. And that, I think that's what Northeast wants to know. They're like, is there a partnership here, and are you guys all committed to it? And
because
if not,
I'd like to know.
I'd like to know too. I think everybody wants to know.
We deserve to know.
All 4 towns benefit from the other towns' willingness to partner.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And we also benefit from the fact that Northeast has another profit center in their transfer work that enables them to provide this service to us at a lower cost. Make no illusion about it. If we go to providing a municipally based EMS service, the cost will increase. Don't anybody tells you that, and I'm not sure if the service level will change noticeably. Don't let anybody tell you it's going to be less expensive. If they do, ask them for the spreadsheet.
yeah.
Well, and anecdotally or factually, what we have before us is a company who is established, they are willing to negotiate, and we have a knowledge and understanding of how much the services will cost us. I mean, I can think of several examples during our budget presentations of a lot of really cool ideas that were thrown out at us, and ideas that are worth exploring, but nothing that we could responsibly take action on in the moment. And without due process. And I mean, I for one have heard very little feedback other than the reports that we get. And I don't know if you guys have been reading these reports from Northeast Mobile Health Service on, they're required to give us these performance reports. And by what we have contractually asked them, they're hitting those marks. If we need to change those standards, let's have that conversation. If something needs to be different in the way that they provide us that service, we need to have that conversation. I mean, we can't, other anecdotally and scuttlebutt and gossip isn't going to get us better service. What's going to get us better service is talking with our service provider and saying, this needs improvement. Can you improve it? Yes or no? Then we move on from there. That's where I'm really frustrated. I mean, I would love to hear if there is some massive deficiency that we are just not being made aware of, or if it's being glossed over. And I'm not saying that there is or that there isn't, but we need to know about it so that we can make appropriate decisions, you know, and we can't go on hearsay.
And that's only going to come if we have meetings with the other towns.
Yeah.
Find out if someone else has some
Yeah,
complaint
or if we have constituents that have knowledge that we're not aware of, you know, I mean, you know, I'm saying that to those listening at home or not listening at home, you know, like if there's information, please share it with us so that we can be well informed as we move forward in this process. So do you need a motion from us, David, or
Do I? No, but don't change your mind when it comes back after I've reached out and said the stuff. But if you wish to
well,
move me to communicate with Northeast Mobile Health and the other partnering communities on our willingness to consider a multi-year agreement and meet with the select boards in a joint meeting or 2 joint meetings, I'd be glad to communicate that as promptly as possible.
I move that you do so.
I'll second it.
in discussion and maybe a possible amendment, I might reverse the order of those things.
Yeah.
You know, you know, should we be able to identify priority meeting as the 4 partner towns, and should the results of that be mutual, that we would be interested in
Yep.
considering a multi-year contract.
Yep.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Any further discussion on that particular motion?
Do we mention a timeline? I
Ah,
would like to just add an urgency to it as soon as possible, within 2 weeks, something of that nature.
prior to
The contract expiring.
yeah.
Perhaps.
Prior to the contract expiring. Yeah, that's the wording.
I can add.
So we'll have a meeting on the June
Pushed.
30th in the evening.
Yeah, June 30th, the evening of June 30th, 11 o'clock.
Long night.
Cannonball run. Okay. If there's no more discussion points on that particular motion, all those in favor? Thank you very much. What else do we need to discuss, David?
Adjourn.
Does it make sense to, I'm asking the board and you, David, does it make sense to have our friend in Portland glance over this, or do you feel like we should just meet as 4 towns and then bang out the details?
Yeah, I had a conversation with Attorney Daggett just to say, you know, run down the little history since January-ish, and to say that we're now looking at the possibility of a 1-year contract with the same provisions we've all talked about, and she's said it's certainly, you know, within the right and ability of the town to do a multi-year contract, and obviously you probably want to get going on it. So there isn't anything here that I didn't share the language, but I certain that there isn't any language that can't be worked out to be above board and legally appropriate.
It may be preemptive to
Yeah, I
send
think-
this draft when
I
there
think it is,
likely will be
Yeah,
another.
I think this is going to change substantially, or I don't know about, substantially before we're done.
Mhm.
But
Yep.
no sense in reviewing it over and over and over and over and over again at whatever we get charged when we're not ready yet, I
Yep.
don't think.
Okay. Does the board have any more business it wishes to discuss? Seeing nothing, can we have a final motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion there? Seeing nothing, all those in favor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you all coming out.
Yep. good. Good.
And 9:15.
Tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Coming in.
Looking forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Good night.
All right.